How do you draft an outline of your essay? In this lesson, you will learn how to draft an outline of your essay by analyzing your claim, text, and notes. The prompt we're working with is, after reading Up from Slavery, Chapter 1, write a multiple paragraph essay that asserts how Washington's use of rhetoric shows his perception and positioning of audience. Support your position with evidence while considering a counterclaim. The writing process begins with reading closely and analyzing, moves then to generating and planning, then drafting and revising, and finally editing and publishing. Right now we're at the generating and planning stage. Well, remember that argumentative writing is when you collect and evaluate evidence and then argue a claim. You need to organize your evidence and transitions between evidence and claim in a thoughtful way. So what this comes to mean is that there are several pieces, several elements you need in your writing. For example, an introduction, which should have a hook, a title, an author, and then a brief summary and the thesis. Your body paragraph, which you could have one or you could have up to 3 or even 4. It just depends on what you're trying to say in your essay. And then evidence within the body paragraph and the transitions between the evidence and the claim, which again you might repeat maybe up to 4 times even, depending on how the evidence hangs together logically within one body paragraph or separated into a different one. And then finally a conclusion, when you restate the thesis and you state a universal statement to bring your reader to some grander truth. So step 1, review the prompt, your notes, text, and your thesis statement. Step 2, break your thesis into 2 to 4 main parts or ideas. Step 3, collect evidence and ideas that support your thesis. And step 4, organize your evidence and ideas in a logical fashion. So for step 1, reviewing your prompt, your notes, the text, and your thesis statement, there's my prompt that I just read. Here I'm looking over the text with pieces that I had highlighted and remembering that my thesis statement is that Washington uses rhetoric to show that he sees his audience as divided racially and he positions them together against slavery. So I'm going to keep this all fresh in my mind as I move to step 2, which is to break my thesis into 2 to 4 main parts or ideas. Now as I look at my thesis, it seems to me just naturally that I could divide it up into 2 different pieces. It seems to me I could have one section or body paragraph that's about how he sees his audience as divided racially, and then it seems to me he could have another one that's really positioning them together against slavery. So now for step 3, I'm collecting evidence and ideas that support my thesis. So I'm really just going to take the first part of my thesis that was about how he sees his audience as divided racially. And I remember this part when he's talking about how former slaves were really very kind and caring towards their former masters. And it makes me think about how divided his audience is. See, this is the part where he shows how well off the black people are. That sure is in contrast to the white person in this passage, because this is when you see the white person has become so reduced in purse and self-control by reason of drink that he is a pitiable creature, whereas the black people in this passage are giving things to the white person. They're giving anything that he needs to help take care of him. Step 4, you organize your evidence and ideas in a logical fashion. So just thinking to yourself, what would make sense if I'm presenting this information to somebody who has never read the text? How can I do so in a logical way so that they will understand the most easily? So I'm going to just start with the first part of my thesis about how he sees his audience as divided racially. And I'm going to plunk underneath that the quotation that I just found about nothing that the colored people possess is too good for the son of old Mars Tom. That's the bit about the former slaves being so kind and giving to their former masters. So remember, as I put this into the structure of an outline, a body paragraph has evidence and transitions between the evidence and claim, which you then repeat as necessary. So, for this first body paragraph that I've decided to do about how Washington sees his audience as racially divided, and here's a side note, as you're working on your outline, more ideas will occur to you. You can beef them up, you can add things in. This should be a continual process. So all I had before is that this paragraph would be about how he sees them divided racially. But I'm also noticing, as I'm looking over these quotations, that it seems like there's a purpose. You know, he sees them as divided racially. This is Washington. So he has to soothe both of their separate fears, both the fears of his black audience and the fears of his white audience. So then the first piece of evidence that I find is the quotation I just showed you about the former slaves giving things to their former master. And then the transition, you can also think about that as my explanation. That's when I'm linking this quotation back to my main idea. So I write here that it shows how giving the black people were. They were in a position to help out the poor drunk white man and had the goodness to do it. So from here, you see I've got my introduction all laid out. There's the body paragraph that I just did, and I would do the exact same process for body paragraph 2 of positioning the audience, where I look back for evidence and then I supply a transition where I'm explaining how that evidence is important and how it links back to the main idea for that body paragraph and back to my thesis statement. So in this writing process, we're in the generating and planning stage. So the first thing we did was to review the prompt, your notes, text, and your thesis statement. Broke our thesis into 2 to 4 main parts or ideas. Collected evidence and ideas to support my thesis. And finally, organized your evidence and ideas into a logical fashion. In this lesson, you have learned how to draft an outline of your essay by analyzing your claim, text, and notes.